is not only knowledge, it is also the ability to apply knowledge in practice. And that quote leads us to think about the importance of going beyond theory and using, I was saying, helps us go beyond theory and also apply our knowledge to effective decision making in real life. We're here today to present a tool that illustrates this principle. Here we are using data, making them strategic partners to make decisions in the region regarding a solid waste and circular economy. So we wanted to show you the impressive work that went into the production of the Waste and Circular Economy Hub. This is a tool that we can use. So with that, we are ready to begin this special event where we wanted to share with you this innovative tool, and we're going to be exploring ways to find a more sustainable future. Let's begin today by looking for solutions. And to begin, I wanted to share with you a video that will give us an overview of the topic. Welcome. The availability of reliable information on managing solid waste is important to solve the problem currently compromising the future of everyone in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2021, the region generated 13% of the waste of the world, which is the third place worldwide. The recovery rate was only 4%. That means that very little is reused or recycled. More than 15% of municipal waste is not collected, and 40% is returned to the environment in unsuitable disposal sites, with burning or disposal in bodies of water. So to solve this problem, information is clear and key. We need information on the management of solid waste and the circular economy in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are looking for a point of reference for the entire region. We need to monitor compliance with the objectives of Sustainable Development Goals that have to do with waste management and the progress in the sector in mitigating climate change. So go to www.hub.residuos sólidos and support this effort to support our moving into environmental improvement and to assure more sustainable present and future.
Este video nos ha dejado muchas ganas de
The video creates a desire to learn more about the hub, so I'm going to call on Magda Correa here from the IDB. Marta, the floor is yours.
Bueno, muy buenos días para todos.
Good morning, everyone. You have no idea how happy I am to be here, making available to the whole region this information system. Before I get started, and I can't start without giving thanks, I want to thank the whole team that has been working on this tool for 2.5 years. We've been involved in this initiative. So I wanted to thank the national governments in the different countries that worked with us. They liked this idea. They agreed to share information with us and to join in supporting this initiative. Also, I want to thank all of our speakers today. We have some people connected remotely, others here in the room, and also the consultative committee. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about the committee later on. I'll tell you who they are, how they've supported us, but they also were key in supporting this information system. So I was thinking, what am I going to say this morning? And I like to improvise. And I was thinking that without data, there is absolutely no GPS. There is no way forward. So I think that data serve as a compass to find our path forward. And to make improvements so as to produce improvements in this sector. So I wanted to tell you a bit about the story behind this, where all of this comes from. This is the regional version. And back then, I wasn't part of the bank, but we have the report, the regional evaluation on solid waste management. This is something the bank did in 2010, trying to make information available so that everyone could learn about the status of a solid waste management in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a work that has been very helpful for the work being done in the region. And so this is a modern version that I bring to you today. This is an update, quote, of that evaluation that was done back then. Of course, using new IT improvements, this allows us to do something that is much more dynamic, something we can update periodically. And that is what I'm going to be presenting you with today. So what is this hub? The hub is a regional information system. It's a platform that you can consult. It's on the website, and it's going to be available for public consultation. The objective is we want countries to have focal points through their national statistics office or through their governments in a sector agency can upload information directly so as to understand what the status is of waste recycling and management. So the whole idea is to know where we are in dealing with waste. And we made an effort to connect waste management with the circular economy and with climate change. And that is something we're going to be talking about this morning, because waste has a major impact in terms of climate change and also in terms of sustainable development. So there are two objectives, 12.6 and 12.5, that commit us to manage waste. And also we have other sustainable development goals that apply, but especially I wanted to mention these two. And we think that this hub is a way to strengthen the digital transformation of the sector. Waste management requires logistics, and logistics requires information, traceability. And along the way, we find that this hub is an opportunity for us to establish a meeting point. And here, and I realize the clock is ticking, but I do have a story I wanted to share with you. One day in the consultative committee, Donnie said, "Oh, it's great that INEP from Ecuador is here and INEP from Mexico is here. So we can share information on how you do things and how I do things." And so this is a meeting point for people involved in this initiative. Now, we're going to also explore this through our website, but we're also going to find interactive features that work with Paulo Vial. So we have these tools that allow us to interactively look at this data. We will have a database that's downloadable, and it's important that we be able to trace information. The region has to work to improve data quality. What we're going to be presenting today is the best information available that we were able to gather. But we cannot say that this data is 100% reliable or that it is a perfect reflection of the status of waste management. It is a way to invite all countries to work on improving their information. But it is important to see where the data comes from. And so now we're going to see that there is a database that supports all of these visual features, and you will be able to download this information and work with it. Now, there's something that I love. It's something we call community. And there we have the different links to national information systems in the different countries of the region. And it was interesting, and I see Pablo that was involved in leading this whole initiative. It was great to see that the countries have made a major effort to improve their information. And several countries have information systems on solid waste management. So this allows you to make the connection so you can go directly to those information systems where you will find data, greater details pertaining to different cities or specific sites. Now, what are the characteristics? This hub emerges as a system where we were able to find data on the country scale for the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. Right now, in the countries where the bank has a presence, the countries that belong to the IDB, we're working also with UNEP, and we are working closely with them so that other countries in the Caribbean will also join this hub so that we can add the information from those countries in the next few months so they can be part of the information system. Also, in the cities, if they want to report their indicators voluntarily, they can. These are downloadable data, open data, and what we hope is to be able to standardize these indicators as a region so we can do an evaluation, so we can compare information across time and between countries. Also, look at it in a regional way. Now, what are these indicators? We worked on keeping the number of indicators to a minimum so that we can focus on those indicators. So the indicators we came up with were how much waste is being produced, how much per person, what is the total per country. In this case, we looked at municipal solid waste. Of that waste, how much is being collected, how much is not. Of the waste being connected, how much goes into landfill, how much goes into unsuitable disposal sites. And also there was a part of the waste that, although collected, we don't know where they wind up. Perhaps they are buried, perhaps they go into bodies of water, but we weren't able to determine destination. And in terms of reuse, we look at recycling the materials, how much is composted, how much are used for anaerobic digestion, etc. And also we are looking at and reporting information on incineration, greenhouse gases, and this is a sector that needs to look at financial sustainability too. So we have data on income and cost because usually this is a service that is subsidized by public revenue. And lastly, jobs. This sector creates a lot of jobs, so it is worth beginning to reflect that information. Now, very quickly, very briefly, in terms of governance, now the bank has put in its resources. We have offered to be the administrators of the system, but in an open way, working with the regional governments so as to share the administration of the system. We are going to have partners, UNEP. We have been working with UNEP for a couple of years on this initiative. And we also are acquainted with other organizations that are interested, that want to be part of this system. And we will be formalizing the agreements with these new partners so as to provide continuity to the system. I already talked about UNEP, and also I wanted to talk to you about the national system of solid waste management in Brazil. We have Susana with us today, and they helped us move ahead. They said, I like the indicators, but we want to have a platform. We want to have a module reflecting the indicators of the hub. I want them to be part of my IT system. And I'm going to begin to create an exportable file so that every year the information from CNID can reach the hub. Now, how did we prepare all of this? I was telling you that we created a consultative committee, and the system is supported by a technical manual where all of the indicators, all of the technical features can be seen and reviewed. All of this can be downloaded. And I wanted to recognize the work of the consultative committee. We worked with them during these 2 years, and there we looked at the indicators, the diagnosis, the information that we had collected, and they have played a key role in reaching this final result. And then lastly, I was saying that each indicator is supported by technical information, and we have designed the processing of the information. We have stressed controlling data quality. That is something that we're going to have to continue to work on as a region, supporting the countries to improve the reliability of this information. And lastly, in order to conclude my presentation, you may be wondering, okay, what's next? What comes next? And in that connection, we see several years of work in terms of data. We want to consolidate the information, provide the financial wherewithal, and also we want the data to be reliable in information systems, and we want the data to be shared through the hub by developing an application that will allow online reporting. In terms of governance, we would call on the countries to be part of other entities, other organizations that are working with us to strengthen the system. And also in future phases, we want to add new data. Of course, we want to continue to upload information on the different indicators that I shared with you, but including other indicators too. Between now and October, we are working on import and export of solid waste in the region. That also is important information. Now, in talking to the Pacific Alliance, the countries that belong to the Pacific Alliance, we also want to look at the circular economy of plastics, and we will be talking about that. So the hub gives us the possibility of adding regional information bit by bit. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and now I am going to go to what you are all looking forward to.
Bueno, entonces tenemos aquí el sistema, ustedes pueden ingresar.
So you can all get into the system. You can go through hubresiduoscirculares.org. We have the page in both English and Spanish. You have circularwaste.hub.org. Again, it's available in Spanish and English. On the main page, you can go into the different tabs. This is the data page. It takes a little while to upload, but what you'll see is a summary of the status of solid waste management in Latin America and the Caribbean for 2021. In 2021, you saw 230 million tons of municipal solid waste, and you can follow the path, what happened to that, how much was collected. We only have a recovery rate of 4.75%. More than 40% are returned back to the environment, so not much is being reused. You see different displays below that. You can see some of these diagrams follow the different paths, the different types of materials. You can see the flow. It provides a more detailed look. This diagram, when we reviewed some experiences in the European Union for more than 20 years, they've had the Eurostat statistics system. We have a panelist who helped us in developing this tool. The idea is to find the final landing place of these of the solid waste and to be able to have a visual display of that. Here is the graphic representation of the data, GHG emissions, the CO2 equivalent per inhabitant per year. You can see heavy metals, you can see methane, because this sector is one of the main methane gas emitters. Here we have costs, we have revenues, we have employment. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I would like to give you an idea of how it works. There are a number of different screens within the use. This is the Caribbean subregion, the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, etc. We can then go back to the region as a whole. We can also take out the Caribbean and look just at Latin America, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil. Let's say I want to look at dumps. In Chile, we can look at the percentage that ends up in landfills. We can see the flows back into the environment and those countries in which we're not entirely sure of the final destination of some of the waste. You can look at the recovery rate, which countries are doing the best job with municipal solid waste recovery, recycling. Colombia is working a great deal on the recycling materials with a high percentage. Costa Rica does recycling, composting. Mexico, as you can see, all of the data for each of the countries. Then we have something quite interesting. From the day we started planning this, we started to think about collecting from a benchmark year and baseline, and someone said, no, let's go into this and look at it country by country. We would find historic data. Colombia has had a very interesting trajectory. This is about 17% of solid waste that are still returned back into the environment. So it's not adequate disposal. Colombia has been working intensively on recycling of different types of materials. They have an industry. We start to see in the yellow where recycling has increased over the years, and the waste that ends up in landfills has been diminishing over the years. I would love to be able to show you each of the links in detail, but I'm just going to give you a snapshot. One of the major challenges we have in the region is summed up here in the Caribbean. Just 10% of solid waste are being disposed of adequately. Almost 90% are going to open landfills, which is not an adequate way to dispose them. I also would like to show you some of the community links in Chile, for example. Here you will find links that will connect us to data systems or the different sector authorities that have data. For example, this is the 2022 environmental report from Chile. You have a chapter on solid waste. It's interactive. Here we can see solid waste generation in recent years, broken down by region. You have Atacama, Valparaiso. all of the different data displayed in the same way. Let's look at Brazil. We can look over at Sinit, which is the national system for data on solid waste management, and you can navigate. There are different options for different countries. Peru's have Hirsa Sol, and we have INEC. Colombia has an information system and a superintendency. There's also a section on regulations. In this phase, we were looking at regulations having to do with the responsibility of producers. For example, you can look specifically at batteries or tires. This provides a great deal of data. This gives you a general idea of what you'll find here. Publications from 2010, we will be publishing an updated evaluation with the up-to-date data that has been collected. Thank you. I think we should give another round of applause. We saw how passionate Magda was in giving us this presentation. We saw a great deal of detail about the hub and how you navigate the hub. It's quite striking and causes a great impact. We have two panels to delve deeper into this. We have Manuela Velasquez, a senior economist, will be the moderator. We invite our panelists to come up to the stage so we can get started. This panel will talk about key systems and data for the sector. We will have a Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored to serve as moderator for this panel. As Magda was saying, here we are going to talk about data systems and data, the authorities in each of the countries. Digital data is important for timely and informed decisions. As Magda was saying, we have this specific operation and informations tool for this sector. What we would like to do now is hear from Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, the UNEP, and the European Union about how they have used digital information effectively in the sector and what the main challenges they faced have been. Thank you very much for joining us for this important conversation. Here in the room, we have Rosana Araujo, who is the head of who is project head from the Secretariat for an Urban Environment. Then we have Diego Cobaleda, who is the coordinator for satellite accounts at the DANE, which is the National Statistics Agency. Martin Wilson Sanchez is also joining us. He is from INEGI in Mexico. We're being joined virtually by Oscar Gomez, who is the chief of the statistics area from Eurostat. And then we have Javier Neme from UNEP. This will be a panel discussion, and we'll ask 2 questions, and each panelist will have 7 minutes to respond. Then we will leave time for 4 questions, 2 from our audience in the room and 2 virtually. Public can raise their hands, those in the room, and approach the microphones. We would like virtual questions to come through the chat, and each panelist will be asked their question. So let's begin with Rosana. What has been CNIT's main contribution in public policy development in Brazil, and how have these contributed to improvements in municipalities of solid waste management?
Good morning. I'd like to say good morning to everyone who's here and also virtually. And I'd also like to thank for this invitation to be here representing CINIR, which is our national system of information on solid waste management. Of course, the big issue here is democratizing access to these data. This information, these data were dispersed, and it was very hard to make any decisions based on reliable data. So through Senior Plus, which is a product that was developed thanks to IDB's support, we have reports, we have data products by which you can visualize the information, and this offers access to the whole of society. We were able to collect the information in such a way as to enable the manager to make decisions based on data. It is a management map that we have, which allows the manager to have access to the data in a geo-reference way. They may make comparisons between cities, municipalities. They may compare the technologies that are used. For example, whatever is used in one city, see what is going on in other city. And through one click, it is possible to get all the history and the timeline for that municipality. And it is possible to see, for example, the distances that have to be made in or covered in order to reach the final disposal of that solid waste. So this data, this information and access to this data enables also citizens and communities to be part of political decisions. So it is an instrument of information. It was instituted by legislation. So it is a tool that is being used by this public policy that was made uh, effective as of 2010. Of course, over time, we have been improved this tool. And what we see today as a return from society is to be able to really monitor and accompany the information. The whole of society has it that in that one place, all of the data, all of the information that are very easily visualized. If you look at the panels, it is possible to demonstrate the geo-referenced information. It is also possible to have access to the information through different panels. We are also able to collect data from different cities, different states, because our sanitation system collects information on urban solid waste management. But at our senior system, we also look at other aspects, such as other types of waste, sanitary waste, and the system is thus able to collect the data, to make this data available. And within this data collection system, it is very interesting to see that we're looking into new ways to collect information. Nowadays, we have three systems. We have one module for state and municipalities. We have the MTR module with an inventory that collects data from the largest generators, the big waste generators. So their data come into this special system that has information on the generation, transport, and disposal. And we also have another module that includes goals and results. We are now developing a system for waste collectors, those who work with waste management. So what we want there is to be able to identify what is the situation, the status of the cooperatives working with waste collection in Brazil. So we're trying to compile all this information, and in future, of course, we want to improve the quality of this data. We have an entity that controls the data generation by the private companies. So we're able to trace these wastes. And in order to obtain a recycling credit, one must prove and show material traceability. In other words, it is a system that is underway, it is evolving and growing. And we make use of technologies in such a way as to get the highlights, to be able to compare one city against another. They can also showcase their own technologies, what they have been using. At the beginning, at CINIR, we're collecting information from states and cities. We promoted road shows, talking to all cities and the states, and we explained to them the way how we were going to report the information. All of this was very helpful.
Aprendidas en el proceso de consolidación y adopción de la
In the
cuenta satélite.
process of consolidation of the satellite accounts, and please tell us how this has contributed to public policy development in terms of collection and all services tied to solid waste management. Thank you. Are you able to hear me? Well, first, as far as lessons learned are concerned, it's important to think about three different things. First, ensure the implementation and follow up on international standards. Those are very important. I will list three and then explain them in more detail. First, as far as we have international standards. Secondly, coordination with both national and international entities. Thirdly, promote the usability of what's been developed. So in order to ensure implementation and monitoring of international standards, this ensures that different developments are robust enough for implementation. This, in turn, and this brings me to the second question, to ensure that the outcomes are accurate enough for public policy development. So ensuring implementation of international standards. In Colombia, we have made great strides forward in the implementation of a general framework and the accountability and accounting system.
Lo mencionaba Magda al inicio.
Now, in terms of coordination, this is something that Marta Luis was talking about. It's important that there be that connection so we can share internationally. Here in the hub, we are working with Mexico, with Brazil, with different organizations, with the Inter-American Development Bank, with Eurostat, and all of this coordination allows us to build and to move ahead in measuring the results in this sector. So that at the international level, but at the national level also, we are thus able to coordinate with different organizations. For example, I work in statistics, but we can work closely with the National Planning Department, with the Ministry of the Environment. So that's important because if we can achieve that coordination, the information will be used for monitoring and also to evaluate the public policies being implemented. And thirdly, it's important to promote usability. In other words, it's great for us to make progress in different types of measurement, etc. But also, we have to be able to promote usability, to say, okay, we have the measurements, now let's use them. And use them for what? To formulate public policy and to support the circular economy. And then going on to the next question, you asked about the challenges we faced. First of all, we have to use international standards. It's important that we follow them, and it's important that we coordinate, and it's important that we promote usability. So those are the major challenges in terms of the work we're doing in Colombia. But in terms of public policy, I should say that, well, here I'm talking about Colombia specifically. In Colombia, we have the COMPAS documents. Those are policy documents, and they are prepared either to address a specific problem that can be identified or to create a roadmap where we can work on a specific issue. And those documents come from the National Planning Department in Colombia. And I wanted to say that in Colombia, we have different COMPAS that have to do with the circular economy and solid waste. And it's important that once the COMPAS is established, that leads to the need to do measurements so we can monitor public policy. But at the same time, when measurements are obtained, that feeds back into the policy, back into the COMPAS. So what I'm saying is that this is a virtuous cycle where that COMPAS is prepared to promote advancements in specific areas, but then all of that measurement, all that data feeds back into the policy. So this is key. In Colombia, and I wanted to say this very quickly, we have a COMPAS on the national management of solid waste that was prepared in 2017. That COMPAS was developed, and then we in our department began to develop information. We developed the account, and as Marta was saying, we have made important progress, but based on these policy documents, these are policy documents that give us this boost and leads us to gather information. In Colombia, we have a COMPAS for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the area of solid waste, we have an SDG. And also we look at recycling rates. That is another objective that is mentioned specifically. And we have a COMPAS on green economy, and the DANE was asked to develop an account for flows in the economy. We have a methodological development in place, and we hope to soon begin with our measurements. And that account was established as a direct response to the circular economy. That is something that was already mentioned. And I think that I should conclude here, but thank you, Manuela. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Diego. Very interesting, the experience in Colombia. Javier? Javier, can you hear me? Great. Yes, I can hear you very well. Now, for UNEP, why is data and statistics gathering so important? And what are the coordination mechanisms with countries that you have developed for data gathering? Thank you, and hello, everyone. But it is a pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank the organizers on behalf of the regional coordinator. It's a pleasure to be here, and what my colleagues who just spoke has been very interesting, and I also appreciated Magda's interesting introduction. So all of this is interesting. It has been brought up. I think we all understand how important data are, but perhaps this has not affected all decision-making levels as it should. It is important to have good data, and not everyone realizes that. When I say data, I'm not only thinking of primary statistical information or things that are processed like indicators or indexes or other referenced data. If we think of decision-making processes, data is essential when we identify problems at any level or in any social, economic, or environmental dimension. Also, data is important for planning, and during project execution, data is also essential. And lastly, something that is just new in Latin America, and I know that this hub will contribute to improving, is monitoring. But with monitoring, I'm not talking only about environmental monitoring. I'm talking about monitoring the efficiency in measuring the effectiveness, the effect, the impact of the decisions that we're making. So in this process, the greater precision, the mapping conflicts, implementing projects, and monitoring projects, for all of this, data is essential. Now, for the work that we have done working with the IDB, and again, I wanted to thank Magda for mentioning this, but there has been excellent coordination at the level of the Caribbean, where we're looking at a complementary way to look at the needs of countries and societies so as to come up with a tool that will improve management. In this case, with the hub, I definitely have to express our appreciation for having been included in developing this tool. It's important so as to make up for the lack of information. And here, the design has been important, and also the coverage of the issue is important. This began as a hub that only looked at waste management, and then the coverage, the scope was increased so as to include the circular economy. And as Magda was saying, this is something that is much broader, something that goes much further, and it also conveys a message of something that has to be done in terms of demographic growth and the use of resources. Now, why is data important? In addition to what has already been said, it is because there's an ongoing need to improve the capture, the processing of data worldwide. And this is something that the colleagues that are participating in this event know. They come from statistics offices in their countries. And this is because of the very nature of data, information on the environment, and the non-conventional measures followed to capture that information. So here we want to work with the IDB and other sectors like the private sector and academia, because in this way we can access more information, and that pertains to the very complex portfolio of problems faced by the region. Now, going back to the second question, you asked how we have used information. As I said, information is the main input that leads to healthy public and private policies, policies that are informed and that are science-based. What is happening is that often the evidence generated by some sectors doesn't naturally flow into the sectors where decisions are made. And it's there where we have to improve the coordination between science and policy. And thanks to that linkage, the United Nations Environment Program has led to global agreements. There was a question about the type of agreements we have entered into. There are different agreements that have been signed that have committed countries to get involved in certain problems and to developing certain solutions and attaining certain objectives. And all of this has to be triggered by the data showing that there is the opportunity for improvement. So it's that information. Often the information is scarce or it is insufficient. And that is something our colleagues at the IDB know. And this is something that was mentioned by Magda when she introduced the hub, when the IDB began to think about a baseline. What information do we have? What can we ask countries to do? We have a lot of holes in our information. And with this data, different agreements have been signed at the global level. Now, some of this information has received more public press. That would be the case of the Paris Agreement. Also, other agreements have been signed on biodiversity, the use of soil, etc. All of this has been motivated, has been triggered thanks to the data that exists. Data showing that there is an important area requiring action. But there are other things at the global and regional levels. And here I would like to point out that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there are 14 countries, I think it's 14 countries, almost half of the countries in the region that have signed the Escazú Agreement. And that is truly a milestone in terms of governance in the region because it's a binding agreement that guarantees access to public information. And that is what we are talking about today. We're talking about justice and participation in things related to the environment. So this hub definitely does make a concrete contribution to making this dream come true, where we guarantee access to our communities, to the public, to this information. And what better way to do it than using the tool that is being introduced today by the Inter-American Development Bank. We're very proud to be able to make a contribution to this initiative. We look forward to continuing with this work because the intranational information, the international information too, as was mentioned by Colombia, strengthening South-South ties, the case of other countries where we look at the flow of materials. Different countries have information that we have to begin to understand and internalize so that we can make this information comparable across the region. I think that that more or less summarizes the importance of data in the decision-making process and how in UNEP and the United Nations system in general, we always require more information, always supporting the process of generating the information so that this can be included in changes of behavior, in rules, regulations, things that will improve the environment and things that we all are concerned about. Thank you. Thank you, Javier. That was very interesting. And Oscar, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you quite well. Eurostat, how does it support countries to improve their statistics at the national and subnational levels? And what recommendations would you make to the region for coordination, for standardization of indicators based on the experience in the European Union? Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be with you. I join you from Luxembourg. And also, I'm very happy to hear about the work that you are doing. And I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate you because what I have seen so far looks very promising and interesting. First of all, I wanted to say that we in Eurostat, as the statistics office of the European Union, we function too as a statistical hub. statistics of all sorts. So our value added as a statistics office is that we gather national statistics, we validate them, and that is an additional step to assure quality control, and then we publish the data. So that is one of our values added, publication, because with our 24 official languages in the Union, along with other co-official languages in different countries, users really appreciate having a site in their language. So I would take my 7 minutes to say that on Monday, we published a revision of our framework for monitoring the circular economy. That is something that was approved by the European Commission. Now, in responding to your question, you asked what we contribute, what we provide countries. The first thing that Eurostat provides, and what I should say is that this is a joint effort. Eurostat works hand in hand with the statistics authorities in different countries through the European statistics system. So in that framework organization, specific work groups are set up in the area of statistics. So we have a work group that works on waste. And that working group is led by Eurostat, and the group discusses technical aspects having to do with waste. And that would be the scope, the methodology, classification, definitions, formats for submitting data, lists of codes, how quality is measured. So in that working group, and this has to do with what Magda was saying earlier on about governance. What I think that Eurostat brings to the table is that we lead, we propose documents to the working group. So in that way, there's always someone who is bringing proposals. The working group raises doubt saying, okay, we have this problem or we need to improve in this area. And then Eurostat proposes solutions, sometimes with the support of consultants. And then the working group gives an opinion. We accept or reject documents. And in that way, we are able to improve in the data quality area. And also we assure that data is complete. Now, regarding the recommendations, I had a whole list of recommendations, but I see that things are definitely on the right track already. One of my first recommendations was to begin by clearly defining the framework. In other words, what is the scope of what is being done? In our case, our scope is a bit out of date. Our scope dates back some 20 years, and we focus more on waste management. But right now, I would recommend a scope that refers more to the circular economy, the interaction with the environment, and I see that that is exactly the way that you are working. Now, under recommendations, also you need a good basis of statistics. Hopefully that can be compared. In other words, they have to be standardized. So you have to begin with an objective. What is it you're trying to do? And from what I see in the presentation on the hub, I think that you have clearly taken into account that objective.
It's also important what I was talking about governance. It's important to have somebody in charge of coordinating and ensuring that everything is in place, one who proposes technical documents. We also heard mentioned before, this is something that's absolutely key. There's another recommendation when working with indicators. I would focus more on quality, having a good database, and then work on the indicators. The indicators will indicate what the fundamental sources of data will be. Here we see clearly what is being done along those lines. I think I have wrapped up before my 7 minutes were up. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Oscar.
Thank you,
Muy
Oscar.
interesante, la experiencia que nos compartes y las recomendaciones.
What you've shared in terms of your experience and recommendations are very important. We will continue on with questions. If anyone here in the room would like to ask a question, please raise your hand.
Perfecto, si se animan, levantan mientras voy haciendo las virtuales.
Great. In the meantime, we'll turn to the virtual questions. Here's one for all of you. Do you think the hub should focus on processing data, or should it also work on generating data, bearing in mind the sector's budget constraints? So should the hub focus on processing data, or should it also work on generating sector data?
Eu acredito que
I believe that the hub, when the hub collects information, it's both processing and generating information. So I think, it collects data, it generates indicators, so it's a way to process data. In order to further develop data processing, I think we should improve data collection systems in all the countries, and then so that the hub can process things in a slightly different manner. I think the way it was developed, it's very interesting. I think it has data and indicators, and that's a way to process information.
Gracias. Creo que
Thank you. Right now, there are agencies responsible for collecting information, like CASA, and I think more than collecting data, one possible function of the hub could be to enhance the mechanisms that exist in the different agencies that are in charge of data collection. That would make the process more robust, and the hub could focus really on processing and analysis of the data in order to generate results for very specific instances where decisions need to be made. Thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I would add another perspective. This is very timely. We're looking at what we're doing about materials, particularly in the case of plastics. These are now higher up on the public agendas. A platform would allow access to information. We have to make the most of this so that we can strengthen data generation, look for possibilities for coordination, and to ensure that the information generated is displayed on the hub. I think the hub is a good pretext for sitting down and talking about how to strengthen data generation and management as far as waste is concerned, broken down by different materials. Much work is being done nationally and subnationally to improve infrastructure for managing waste. I think this is something that could be done based on the joint work. Great. Oscar? I'm probably going to say something quite similar. In the European Union, we work based on the principle of subsidiaries. In other words, that tasks should be done at the regional, national, or a supranational level, whatever is the most adequate in the case. So it could be done subnationally or nationally. That will allow data to exist at those levels. The information should be made available and can be used in different ways. For example, in Eurostat, we want to ensure and promote the interoperability of data and to make sure that the data are comparable and the right data as well. At the European Union level, countries often say enough. We cannot do any more. We do not have the resources necessary. For example, in the waste account, we created a pilot project to open these accounts so that we could do some specific analyses on the flow of plastics, as we heard mentioned earlier. Thank you very much, Oscar. Rosanna, we have a question for you. In the logic that underpins circular economies, what are the limitations of systems? For example, should liquid waste be a part of this? And how does governance play a role here?
Na verdade, no CNIR, por
In
meio do
fact, at CNIR, by means of the declaration of waste transportation, we collect information about the sewage, etc. So we collect information about non-solid waste. But I believe that in order to go forward, we have to establish a framework. And I believe that information and indicators that should be worked on today are mainly or aim at decreasing the amount of generated waste or decrease the amount of waste that first are disposed inappropriately. Then we can go on and we can improve the rate of recycling one step at a time. So I think this is much ahead of our reality. I believe that ideally we should make one step at a time.
Diego. Hoy día los documentos COMPES permiten en Colombia.
These days, the COMPES documents give Colombia guidelines for the management of solid waste. What are the laws or regulations having to do with construction waste? And to what extent are these being complied with thus far? In Colombia, we have two COMPES having to do with solid waste. The first is the COMPES that regulates solid waste management. That's been around since 2016. And then we have the one related to SDG. And then we have a COMPES on green growth. The COMPES on solid waste, particularly as far as construction materials and demolition materials are concerned, there is information available. Nevertheless, in response to the question, there are some significant limitations. In the economic account on the flow of solid waste, we're not currently including information having to do specifically with that sector. In Colombia, we have information and a working group on information on solid waste. All of the different agencies that have a hand in this are involved, the statistics agency, different secretariats and ministries. And so we have addressed the handling of solid waste in the construction sector, but we need to move forward with that. What experience do you have on the use of data? Is this something that users are clear on, or are there issues with how to use the information? I'm wondering what you're referring to when you talk about the users of the data. In the DANE in Colombia specifically, there are laws regulating personal data protection and also statistics. This is a law that DANE always bears in mind when collecting and using data. In the case of DANE, all of the civil servants, contractors have to sign data confidentiality agreements. We are always, when collecting statistics, through the signing of those non-disclosure documents, the appropriate use of information, and it needs to be kept confidential where necessary. Thank you. This is a question for Oscar. Oscar, you mentioned this earlier, but we're being asked in the chat if you could tell us a little bit more about how you deal with the diversity of languages and terminology in the European Union. Thank you for that question. It is very complicated, especially in more technical areas. The European Commission has a translation and interpretation service. We have terminologists there, specialists in terminology. Generally speaking, that's how we work. All member states have the right to communicate with European institutions and their official language. Very often, we will produce the reports or the information in all of the languages, but English is the main language for the production of a report. We rely on our terminologist experts. Then there's a working group. When we refer a translation to the terminologist, and if there's some doubt, then we refer that back to the working group. Now I have a question for all of you. What is your opinion about the term circular economy, looking at the cost benefit perspective of investors? So Javier, if you'd like to begin. Sure. The concept of circular economy is defined rather broadly. It has to do with the use of system of reuse of resources by human beings and those having to do with nature. It's about the atoms and molecules that spin around the different components. The linear economy, which was about the extraction of resources, its use, and then disposal. There was no thought to bringing it full circle until we started thinking about circular economies. It's not limited to a single sector. It's a new paradigm of how resources are used, types of production, types of use, and all sectors, not just in waste disposal. It involves governments, academia. The idea is to look at it as a new way for us to relate to the environment and the resources. I wouldn't say it's limited to one sector. There are many sectors involved in this paradigm shift. Thank you, Javier. Would anyone else want to weigh in on your opinion of the term? Just very briefly, starting with the point, if I'm not mistaken, there is no accepted definition of what a circular economy consists of. I think it's we heard. Our perspective is that it's a new paradigm, it's a new way of focusing the economy from the design standpoint, the design of products, and where you preview or are looking forward to the way they will be disposed of. In developing indicators, there is a challenge that we face. It's a methodological challenge. We classify economic activities, but how can we know which traditional economic activities related to waste, for example, recycling, and that has to do with the circular economy. But let's say there's a shoe factory. And these may be slippers or flip-flops, and those are made using recycled plastics. How would we classify that shoe factory? And how do we measure it within the circular economy? Thank you, Oscar. Diego or Rosaria, would you like to add anything here? I simply wanted to say that I completely agree with what Javier and Oscar said. I would like to just very briefly note that in DANE, we are developing a satellite account for the circular economy. We're doing this following the way that statistics are produced and the standards. These days, there is no standard definition of what a circular economy is, but all of the literature tackles us head on. Some of the developments in this framework are quite novel. And to not be repetitive, I agree with what my colleagues said, but I would also like to add that we're going to need some coordination so that we can be more precise and accurate. A lot of experimentation is going to need to be done in terms of the conceptualization and also measurement thereof. Rosana?
Gostaria de complementar.
Yes, I'd like not to add something, but to strengthen the importance of measurements in order to develop indices and indicators so that the consumer and society at large is aware of what's recyclable or how much has been recycled, and in order to avoid the greenwash. So it's very important to have space where we can exchange experience and we can better define indicators and measurements.
Thank you all for your answers. Martin, can you hear me?
No te oímos.
We can't hear you.
Is
Is your microphone muted? There we go. Okay. Here we have the statistical chief of INES in Mexico, and I wanted to ask you two questions. What have the challenges been in terms of implementing the municipal solid waste model in Mexico City and also working with sub-government levels? And how has this been used for the information system on solid waste? Well, first of all, I wanted to apologize quickly to the audience and to the organizers.
La plataforma me enviaba actualizaciones reiteradas, ¿no?
My Zoom was asking me to update once and again, but I wanted to answer your question. I would say that the main challenge for a data generation program is to guarantee a continuous flow of resources. Doing basic statistics requires a sizable investment of resources because a team has to be put together. That team has to be endowed with competencies. And if we want this to endure, we have to provide organizational, financial assurance that this will actually happen. And generally, this means that we have to achieve the support of many people within the organization. But also, the other challenge is to begin to create a relationship with those reporting. The people reporting are important for you to get good data, data that doesn't require so much processing. So people reporting are key. You have to win them over. You have to make them become your partners. And also you have to discuss data with them, because if you don't have a good working environment, a good relationship, it's hard to get that support. So reporting that every day so much waste is being collected, and then you compare that with the population and you say somehow this isn't adding up. So you have to convince a person to give you more reliable data. You have to look at their administrative accounts. And in the case of Mexico, this is a major challenge. We have 2,550 municipalities. There are municipalities that economically, demographically are large, but also you have other municipalities with a population of 200 or 300 people. And the difference of administrative capacity is huge. There is a major span. So regarding interinstitutional relationships, we work within the framework of the national statistics system, and this is a system that was established by law. INEGI is the coordinator of CINIEC, that is the acronym, and there is a coordination role, and also we produce data. And in the case of waste, the Secretary of the Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico is the leading organization. And this is a project that has been worked on by INEGI. We were part of preparing a questionnaire. We have a close relationship with them. We talk about results. We train in terms of the use of statistical databases, geographic databases, all of that affecting the results of the project. So now we have been working in this way for more than 10 years. And the program has definitely achieved a good level of maturity. Thank you, Martin. And I wanted to thank all of the panelists for their time, for their answers. And we see that improving the management of solid waste in the region is a major challenge, and the creation of this waste hub is a step in the right direction to tackle this problem. But as our panelists have said, collaboration with strategic partners is essential to be able to have a sustainable management of waste. It is important that countries provide periodic information to monitor and improve management of solid waste. Information is important for effective decision-making and for a more sustainable future. So I thank you for your time, and I thank the audience for their questions and their participation. Thank you.
Gracias, Manuela, y a todos los panelistas y a
I
la
wanted to
audiencia.
thank Manuela, the panelists, the audience. I wanted to thank the audience for the questions. And now you're free to move back into the room.
Demos un segundito que nuestro próximo invitado está por entrar a la sala.
It will take a second. Our next guest is about to come into the room.
Sí, queríamos recordarles dos
And I wanted to remind you of two important things, the people that are connected remotely. First of all, you can click on the globe and there choose your language. We have interpretation in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And I wanted to recommend Mr. Sergio Campos, who is going to make a short presentation. Thank you, Magus. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy Recycling Day to all of you. This is an important date for all of us. I send a warm greeting to our audience. This is a very important topic. And one thing that I always have felt very proud about as a member of the IDB is that I led the initiative pertaining to recycling. And in addition to having worked with the private sector, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, others, we have brought informal recyclers to the decision-making table. And you know that they work hard. These are people that are very poor, and in a region where very little is recycled of the things that they recycle, they wind up with a very small benefit of what is being done. So it's great to be here today that we're launching the hub. So I wanted to thank Magda, Carolina for the excellent work that they have done in putting this hub together. I remember being in Argentina back in 2010, 2011, trying to prepare a project on solid waste, and there was no data. The only thing we had was a document that in paragraph 1 or 2 of the disclaimer saying this data is not very reliable, but that's all there was. There was nothing else. And then as the years went by, we, with Alfredo, the people of the division, we tried to verify that information because it's hard. Because solid waste depends on municipalities and their strength. And we know that this is an area where a lot is yet to be done in the region. But then finally, thanks to technology, we have this information that will make not only contribution to the sector, but also we're going to be reducing the use of paper. That is a contribution too, and we will have firsthand information, and we will be able to reach more places with more reliable information. And thanks to that, we will be able to make decisions, prepare projects, develop cases so that municipal governments and national governments, regional governments will be able to realize how important this sector is. Now, In my presentation, I wanted to emphasize exactly why it is that we're doing this and why this is such an important issue for the bank.
Este otro. Está bien. Ok. Ok. Primero que nada, hoy en día se ha vuelto una
First of
agenda
all, today,
internacional.
this has become part of the international agenda, and that is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And just like all goals, goals are interrelated. And obviously, solid waste is linked to water and sanitation, to drainage, to partnerships. Plus, it is also part of the Sustainable Development Goals that we have signed up to for 2030. Also, this has become an important part of our climate change agenda with a contribution of 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a sector that has the greatest effect with greenhouse gas emission alongside agriculture and energy. But the great advantage of working on reducing greenhouse gas emissions by working with solid waste is that we, with a comparatively small investment compared to other sectors, we're able to get quick short-term results, in addition to all of the benefits that we will be talking about later on. Third, putting it into the plastic pollution or trying to put an end to the use of plastics. When here in the bank we discuss plastics and their use, we saw that the contribution of Latin America to the global problem is not substantial. We contribute only 3%. I shouldn't say only 3%, but what is truly scary is the exponential growth of plastic and its use. That is something that has been seen in other regions of the world, and consequently, this is a major challenge that we face. We want to try to keep this from happening, but unfortunately, a lot of our bodies of water, our rivers, our lakes are being affected by the presence of plastics, and all of that has the additional complexity of degradation, etc. Plus, the matter of solid waste has become the banner for circular economy because solid waste allows us to make important strides in the circular economy in the short term, and it produces a visible result. Now, what are the benefits of adequate management of solid waste? Or what are the impacts if that management is not appropriate? First of all, many health problems, respiratory diseases, skin diseases, gastrointestinal affections, also the spread of epidemias, dengue, Zika, others. Poor management definitely is an invitation to affecting the health of our population, allowing different vectors to operate. Also, this is something that is visible. Sometimes there is poor management, and often this affects the environment through leaching. And with wastewater, etc., we are putting at risk one of the major sources of drinking water in many places in the region. Third, as we were saying, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is an important contribution. It's important that we manage these emissions so as to make an important contribution in this area. Third, it affects the quality of the soil. Also, it affects our landscape, our tourism activities. Many of the projects concerning solid waste are in cities with a lot of tourism because this affects their ability to showcase their assets. Also, it is hard for us to find a place to get the investment to address this problem, and then all sorts of things are collected, that things that can be used and those that cannot. So instead of having a final disposal site, if we did appropriate management, if we could do good sorting, that final disposal site would last much longer. Also, greater use of raw materials. In a consumption society, if we continue to consume in a linear fashion as we do now, we will deplete the raw materials that we have. If we make better use of solid waste, we could reduce the pressure on the production of raw materials. And then lastly, the economic losses and the value of land. If we do not manage solid waste appropriately, that leads to a depreciation in land values because of the negative impact that we are acquainted with. And what are the challenges then? Well, the first challenge is to try to transform the linear economy that we have, where we extract, produce, use, and throw away, where we could actually be using some of the waste. Waste is produced when you make the decision to stop using something, often with containers. For some products, you can use those containers as a base or for drinking water, or you can use them on your desk to store your pencils. But as soon as you decide to throw something away, it becomes solid waste. And that is an example that could be extrapolated to other situations. And it's one of the major challenges of the region, which is to establish circularity so we can use things for much longer. And then second, as we said, 40% of municipal solid waste is sent back into the environment. In other words, we are not disposing of them because the places that are disposal sites, that's 46%, we are not managing that facility optimally. Plus 52% of the waste that we generate is organic, and 32% of the waste is containers and packaging. And in the area of containers and packaging, it is possible to make our disposal sites last longer if we can better use that type of container or packaging. And as we were saying a while ago, only something like 4 or 5% of the waste that we generate is then reused in some way. It is the lowest percentage worldwide. Although we may be collecting something like 96% of the resources that we generate, we're only using 4% of that waste collected. This is something that we talk about a lot with the teams, and that is that waste is not in the environment because the waste can walk on its own. No, they are in the environment because someone dropped them, someone threw them away. And if we can change behavior of consumers, of users, we need to produce a change, not only in reuse or recycling of the resources that we have, but also being able to buy products from companies that are being responsible in their production systems. We need to make sure that municipalities give priority to this sector, and national government should also be taking measures, enacting regulations to strengthen this sector. And also, people have a lot of power, not only in terms of their individual reactions, but also in producing a systemic change in the system. And then something else that we have said before, this is a sector that is a high polluter in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
What other challenges are we up against? Most of the informal settlements and poor neighborhoods do not have adequate waste collection systems, and this unleashes a series of adverse impacts on the environment. Secondly, solid waste management is dependent on municipal and city budgets. And it's been difficult to measure fee systems. It's quite cheap based on weight and looking at separating the different types of products. So we need to continue to work on that. Governance and capabilities must be enhanced, regulatory frameworks, human capital. There is a great deal of work to be done. Cities must be strengthened. Comprehensive solutions are required. The municipal sector needs measures and budgets for proper disposal. The private sector, through their packaging and their containers, have to change their behavior so that there is convergence. This is why the hub was created. There are data. The data are the best available, and based on those data, public policy measures are beginning to be taken, but even so, much remains to be done. We're hoping and we believe that the hub is going to make a huge contribution. The great challenge is going to be to make the hub sustainable over time. We need the sector to be able to absorb the hub, take ownership of it, and that will ensure sustainability. When you saw how the hub works, you saw some of the data we're working with. These are alarming statistics. And if you look at the environment, how little is being recovered and reused, we are collecting a significant amount, but all of the system could be improved. There are 10 key takeaways. First, we have to improve the availability of data and statistics so that the sector can be prioritized. Financial sustainability and governance of service providers is very important. This is the only way that the solutions being proposed will be lasting over time. The operators have to have the necessary budgets to cover their costs. We have to increase recovery and reuse for new technologies. We need to be more efficient in the collection routes and management of final disposal sites. There has to be differentiated management, looking at the shelf life of the different materials, especially as far as final disposal is concerned. We have to intensify efforts to eliminate flows into the environment. We want to make sure there are positive benefits of appropriate management. The public needs to become more aware. We have to take immediate and short-term actions. Green job creation. With few resources, we know that we can improve the living standards and quality of life for individuals. And there are many different types of green jobs that can be created. We have to close the gaps in municipal solid waste management in the subregions. And this is within countries. We are going to try to narrow those gaps, improve management. This is very key for mitigating the impact of climate change in the short term. This will help us move more quickly toward a circular economy. Lastly, I'm very pleased to have been here. I wanted to thank all of those of you who are here in the room, those of you joining us virtually. We will continue to work on this. We will need your support so that we can level the playing field and improve the management of solid waste. Thank you very much, Sergio, for that presentation on the sector and the need to move forward toward a circular economy. Now we will hear from Carolina Piamonte. She will join us in the next panel. We will talk about the hub as an ally of the circular economy and climate action. I would invite our panelists to please take a seat up on the stage. Thank you so much, Maros. Thank you so much, Sergio, for the messages. I think it gave us some perspective on why what's being done is being done. We have representatives of different agencies and different ways of looking at the data. The idea is to centralize the information through this hub. We need the data, but it's where do we find it for the region? That was the ultimate objective. In the bank, I have used this for preparing documents. I immediately download the database to look at the status of each country, what type of data are out there, look at waste streams, particularly plastics, and identify some priority areas for climate action. The matter of methane is very important. It's also important to look locally at how operators and agencies are collecting data. Here, I will introduce our panelists. We have Daniel Rochberg from the Global Methane Pledge, Senior International Climate Action Specialist from the U.S. State Department. We have Carolina Urmanita, the Director of the Circular Economy and Waste Program at the Global Methane Hub. Francisca Fardias, who is an advisor in the Pacific Alliance. She has worked with the IDB and others about the circular economy and plastics. We have Pablo Alcon, who was part of the building of this hub. And virtually, we are being joined by Pablo Moreno, who is the operations manager in Ruminan, Ecuador. He will provide a local perspective about indicators. I will ask an initial question. You will have 5 minutes to respond. Then I will ask a follow-up question. You will have 3 minutes. And just like in the first panel, we will then move on to questions from our audience, both those who are here with us and virtually. Let's start with Daniel. The Global Methane Pledge, under the leadership of the State Department, is a global force to reduce methane to 30% by 2030. Why methane and this pledge? And how do they rely on data and statistics for reaching its objective? Thank you, Sergio and Magda and the team for the invitation. And if you'll allow me, I apologize, I'm going to continue in English.
Why methane and why the Global Methane Pledge? I think your slide, Sergio, really defined the ecosystem that the waste sector operates in, right? And in the middle of the SDGs and the climate change crisis and the circular economy discussion and ocean plastics. And that's the sort of intersection we're all struggling with. So I come here from the climate space. I work for a special presidential envoy, John Kerry. And for us, our epiphany 2 or 3 years ago was how incredibly important methane really is to the safety of our planet and how much we had overlooked that as a planet. So The main goal that we have before us is to keep a 1.5 degrees Celsius future within reach. And we are now at 1.1 degrees Celsius with the current El Nino that's likely to get higher. President Biden just hosted several leaders at the Major Economies Forum a couple of weeks ago, during which the International Energy Agency presented and made it clear that there's literally no way to keep 1.5 degrees within reach without tackling methane. If we achieve our net zero energy goals, when we achieve them, when we achieve our deforestation goals, we still will overshoot 1.5 degrees C. Methane is essential. It's somewhere between 0.2 or 0.3 degrees of that reduction. And moreover, methane works faster to cool the planet than any of these other interventions. When we achieve our decarbonization goals, the benefits of those reductions will accrue later in the century. We can't afford to wait until later in the century. So methane is absolutely critical. But as I mentioned, up until 2 or 3 years ago, there were some very earnest but very modest efforts, and they were not at scale. And so the effort that lots of us are undertaking now is something called the Global Methane Pledge. It was launched by the US and the EU in 2021. It is now 150 countries strong, working with incredible partners like the Inter-American Development Bank, like the Global Methane Hub, with a goal of reducing global methane emissions 30% by 2030. In methane tons, that means 150 million tons of methane per year need to be out of the sky by 2030. It's a very heavy lift, and that brings us to the waste sector. Some of those tons are going to come from the oil and gas sector, for sure, a lot of them. Some are going to come from the food and agriculture sector, a fair amount of them. A big chunk of those tons need to come out of the waste sector. Waste accounts, as you mentioned, 18-ish% of global methane emissions come from the waste sector. I was looking at your excellent data hub this morning and trying to do a back of the envelope calculation. Ballpark, if there are, I think you said 345 million tons CO2e on the data hub, if you convert that to methane and assume that a lot of that is methane, we're talking about 10-ish or 12-ish million tons of methane per year from this region that can be a contribution to that 150 million ton reduction. If you imagine half of those tons can be cut by 2030 in a very ambitious sense, that's 5 to 6 million of those 150 that we need. That's an absolutely essential contribution that can be made. And that leads me to my last point, I think, about why data. It's very impressive to see the work that's gone on in the hub that's been launched today. It's really exciting to see the granular detail, the texture detail by country. And I think there's a real opportunity now to think creatively about how those of us who are coming at this issue from a climate and a methane perspective can really continue to partner with the IDB so that we are doing everything we can to partner to track the methane components of that. So one of the things we launched under the Global Methane Pledge is called the Global Methane Pledge Waste Pathway. It's a group of entities like the IDB, Global Methane Hub, trying to get those tons out of the sky. And what I see today and what I've seen over since COP27 really is IDB taking an incredibly vocal and powerful leadership role in driving this conversation forward, for which we're very excited and really looking forward to seeing where it goes. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Ay, me cambié, perdón. Gracias. Sí, ya.
Thank you very much. We will continue with Carolina. Carolina, as part of the pledge, is a partner of the hub and is doing a great deal of action. So what role does the hub play in the management of waste, and why is this so important given the targets that you have set for yourselves? Thank you, Carolina, and congratulations to the IDB for what you're doing this. I commend you for it because it's a great contribution. So the Meeting Hub is a philanthropic organization that is ensuring meeting the pledge. We want more countries to sign on, and those who are not, we want to encourage them to do so. Globally, 80% of the financing in the waste sector goes primarily to incineration and not necessarily with methane capture. There's a great challenge Why are we talking about methane? We just heard from Danny, 80 times the amount of heating of CO2 in 20 years. And that's why reducing it is so important this decade and next decade. And as Sergio noted in his presentation, one of the key takeaways is that we can take actions to reduce methane in the short term. That's why it is so important for us to work together. Something important when we talk about waste and waste management, we need to talk about prevent the generation of waste in the first place. In this platform, we see waste indicators in terms of what's generated at the municipal level. If you look at SDG 11.5 and 12.3 is also important. That is prevention. That is a huge opportunity before us. And you ask about what our role is in terms of data and how to improve its management. We have 4 pillars of activity that are part of our theory of change. The first has to do with data transparency and follow-up. Secondly, support for public policies at the national and subnational level. Also support for projects with different organizations, for example, organic recycling in Latin America. We also have to channel financing into methane reduction. When we talk about data transparency and follow-up, there's a particular characteristic. We have this impact of methane on global warming. We can also look at it at the satellite level. In philanthropy and through support through the Global Methane Pledge, we are looking at methane emissions at the satellite level because they're detected from space using this technology. These are the energy and the waste sectors. We have a major hotspot in landfills. What are we doing? And that's why I'm very pleased to be able to work with the IDB. It's to make this information available, to improve the data, to improve our emissions inventories, where countries are reporting in the context of the Paris Agreement, and then have better information on activities and emissions. This is very important because it enables us to show, of course, we have a baseline, which is very important, but it's how we are reducing these emissions. We want data, we want better information so that we can implement mitigation actions. This is something that we can see through the satellite monitoring. We have success stories, one in California, where we were able to see how the reduction in methane emissions are related to reductions in complaints by the community. This is something we're seeing in the platform. There's a relationship with communities. As we advance, we are improving quality of life for all. So that's what we're doing. We're very pleased to be involved in this and be part of the advisory committee. And we're hoping to be involved in many more initiatives with the IDB.
Siento que estamos aprendiendo un montón.
Thank you very much for your answer. We're learning a lot. Now, also, the Pacific Alliance has prioritized management of plastic. Here we are measuring indicators in the countries, and what information are you measuring? Thank you. Thank you. I would to thank the IDB for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I work in the Ministry of the Environment, and here we are involved in the project of the IDB working with the Pacific Alliance. And those of you not acquainted with the Pacific Alliance, it is a trade agreement amongst 4 countries, Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Mexico. So within that framework, we, for some time, have been collaborating on a sub-regional basis. And in 2016, we established a group on growth and the green economy. And then there was a presidential statement on the circular economy. The following year, we established a roadmap. We, in 2021, working with the IDB, the Pacific Alliance began to work on this project, which is very ambitious and aims at using the information systems available in the 4 countries by looking at different indicators, looking at information gaps. That is something that has not been mentioned so far, and it's essential. We have to identify the gaps in information, and by closing those gaps, we will be able to improve the performance of countries in the area of waste management. There, we will also be able to identify best practices, and that will also support collaboration amongst peers. Now, in that connection, we are very happy about this initiative. I was pleased to listen to the first panel and to be able to learn more about how this hub is moving forward. This is a very timely initiative and something that was said by several colleagues. And I wanted to thank Sergio Campos from UNEP that mentioned the need to work together to democratize information. As our colleague from Brazil said, that's very important. Plus, information is helpful so as to improve performance and decision-making in a way that is science or data-based, and it's important to keep that in mind. So just so you all know, this hub is also supporting the countries in the region. Now, the different countries of the region, 15, have supported the Escazú agreement, and it also is contributing to the thorough implementation of that agreement amongst countries. And in listening to my colleagues, I was thinking of different ideas. A lot was said about the importance of being connected with people in other parts of the world that are working on the same issue. And here I was thinking of the OECD. The OECD already includes 4 countries from the region. Peru is about to join. And the OECD works a lot with information. So they do a lot of work to standardize and to develop the best public policies that can work on gathering information, closing gaps, because what they do is they compare initiatives across countries. So that would be an important idea. We can work with that partner so that we can all better use this information that is connected in such a rigorous way. Also, this is a repository of information because it shows what is being done in different countries. So you can see what is being done, what is being done better, what mistakes have been made. That way we can all learn from those mistakes and move ahead together. Another important thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I'm sure that you're acquainted with this, but it's going to be important to know who is using the hub, who is the user. What do they use it for? How do they use it? And it's important to determine that so you can know how to include, how we can expand its use. So it's important that somehow we reflect that information in the hub, because if someone isn't in, they're going to want to join. So it is important to create a connection with the government so that they will support the process, feed information into the platform so the platform can allow us to exchange information. So perhaps I should stop here for now, but I do want to congratulate you on all of this good work. And of course, we are very willing to support this initiative as a part of the Pacific Alliance and as a country too. It's important to remember that your alliance will be using this information. Now, also, we have Pablo Alarcón. He has been working on the circular economy. So, Pablo, I wanted to ask you, of all of the work you've done, what opportunities do you think the hub brings us? What initial messages have you identified? Thank you, Carolina. It's a pleasure to say hello to everyone. In October of last year, we were here in this same building, and I said that there was going to be a before and an after for the circling of the waste and circular economy hub. And I'm happy to see we're all together here today. So there have been 3 years of very hard work led by Magda Correa and supported by Carolina Piamonte, plus working with representatives of different statistics offices across the region, also by our regional consultants. And I think we need to acknowledge their work. These are consultants that did a lot of gathering of data to put together a baseline. So I wanted to thank Linda Broquez, Lourdes Roron, Guillermo Gonzalez, and Carlos Sagasti, who also took part in this process. So 3 years. 3 years of a lot of work that took us to looking into the waste management information programs that exist. And in that way, we're able to design and build this hub. And looking at the different processes that make it up, the different components, and that is in the manual that Magda mentioned, so that we can gather valid information and publish it, and especially to use metadata for the indicators that you have seen. These are the indicators of interest. So that was the basis for the information. And with the design, we're able to build what we call the diagnosis, the availability of information already existing in the region for the sector. And then through the regional consultants that I mentioned, we were able to integrate all of this data so as to be able to establish the database, establish a baseline, and as was already said, we wanted to assure traceability. Where did the data come from? What was the source? And in that way, you can all download it and use the information. And then with all of this background, what we did next was we designed the evaluation of the status of recycling the solid waste in municipalities. And what can I say in this regard? This is the culmination of the sustained effort that has taken 3 years. Today, I can assert that there is a correlation between the availability of information and the quality of municipal solid waste management. That is the cornerstone of our approach. And I could also say that this is the first mirror that we see ourselves as a sector being reflected. But this is something that can be improved upon. We're not at the end of our effort. Now, this waste hub was designed to be updated, to be improved. It was built following an operational manual, establishing a baseline, a diagnosis, a portal, which is what you saw today, and a regional assessment. The first regional assessment done based on this methodology. And we want to continue to update this periodically. And it's here where the opportunities come in. I would refer to several of the statements that have been made before. So where are these opportunities? How are we going to maximize the flow of materials that are currently being sent back into the environment? How can we increase the percentage of waste being used again through composting, through recycling? How can we mitigate methane emissions, something that was mentioned by this panel, which is the main greenhouse gas emission affecting the sector, and it's going to have an impact on climate change. So how can we make visible the thousands of jobs that people are collecting? And these are people currently not being taken into account. We need to recognize their efforts. And lastly, we have to see what can be done in terms of assuring the long-term sustainability of the sector. Here, I would make an appeal to the countries, to the people participating in today's event, people that are part of this event. Please get involved in the following phases of the waste and circular economy hub. We need to work with the community of practice to share experience and knowledge. Let's get to know each other. And here I'm going to use an expression. We need to be able to measure, to move ahead, and to improve our municipal solid waste management in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. Next, we're going to go to Pablo Moreno. He is connected remotely. Pablo, one of the important things for this hub is to link the national and local data. And Sergio was talking about the operators in the waste sector. They play a key role in terms of gathering this data. So I would like to ask you, the information gathered by the hub on waste and the circular economy, how can this improve management in the municipalities and with the operators? And what benefits does this provide to the local level? Thank you. Thank you. And greetings to everyone. We have seen with great pleasure that data is being exchanged in this way. And for 12 years now, I have been working with waste in different companies, but we know how important it is to have indicators that would allow us to measure what we're doing, monitoring what we're doing, and improving the quality and the provision of services. We, as a company, we are the public company in charge of cleaning the streets, collecting trash. And because of that, we, in order to guarantee good service delivery, we have been doing digital transformation. And there we have taken some very interesting actions. We have a collection method, and we have also lateral loading collectors. And so we process a significant volume of information. And because of that, we have been able to work with the indicators for solid waste management. And this gives us a perspective, an approach that is more global, and we can focus on the details, for example, of the per capita production of waste. Usually these are exercises that are implemented, but as having this indicator allows us to monitor the evolution of the statistic. So in looking at the variation in numbers over different periods, we get an idea so that we can make timely information, but all of that being data-based. It's important that the Waste Hub, the portal presented by Magda, is an important source of information, and it will allow us to better understand what is being done in other countries of the region and draw a comparison so we can see how aligned we are, so as to be able to pursue certain objectives, so as to recover more materials. In 2021, we did differentiated collection, and there we reached 350% of what we had done the previous year. And that was because of an application of technology. So we put a QR on the area where we gathered recycled materials. Of course, we do a visual verification to make certain that the waste is recyclable. And then there's an application where we register the data being delivered. So in that way, we know how much recyclable material is being given to us by each resident. And we want to be able to use that data gathered from that exercise, because training of the population also has to be ongoing. Not all citizens are part of this recycling culture. They don't understand how important all of this is, and that we have to be responsible with the waste that we are producing. So we are now incorporating an inclusive recycling model where all of the materials collected through different differentiated collection channels can somehow be an economic source of income for families that are poor. And we, as an entity, have to provide adequate conditions for that work to be done appropriately. So it's a way that we can use technology so that we can gather better data. And in that way, the data allows us to improve the quality of the service we provide. Now, in terms of technology, we have made significant strides, and we have worked in such a way that the information from the source comes in with different variations. The logic behind these tools, the programming language of these tools allows us to do the initial validation, because what used to happen was that during collection, physical formats were used, and those physical formats wound up being fed into different platforms, but modeling all of this data would generate a lot of delay. Also, some of the information might have been entered erroneously. But now, with the tools we have, our collection staff is able to gather the information, and that gives us better indicators. So in that way, we can, with those indicators, follow a approach that provides better visualization. So we can see coverage at the level of households. Those are the households where I am rendering the service, and I can see what households aren't being reached. So if the people cancel the service, we, as a company, have to do everything possible to provide them good quality service. So in that framework, it has been essential that we be able to count on the support of the hub and have opportunities like this one, where we can share with other professionals, other colleagues, this experience. We are going through a change of turnover in the municipal authorities, and we hope that the new authorities will begin working on real issues and not trying to reinvent the wheel when there is a significant amount of work already in place. Thank you. Now, I would like to ask if anyone from the audience here in the room has a question for the panelists. I see that Diego from DANE. Yes? I see that you have a question. Yes, my question goes to Francisca. Francisca, first of all, I want to congratulate you on what you have done in the Pacific Alliance, but please tell us a bit about the experience and the lessons learned as part of this project. And in the short term, what actions do you intend to implement regarding the project? Thank you for that question. Well, the truth is, a lot of things are happening all at the same time. So it's not easy to start by saying, okay, we're going to profit from all these processes, or this project will feed into these other areas. But we're working on that because all of these public services in the region are provided by the same entities. So Chile, for example, has developed over the last few years many public policies in this area, beginning with the extended liability of producers and also in the area of recycling. And this, of course, is a huge task because different priorities were set, And we are working on a regulation to measure how much is being produced and then doing pricing to see how we can do that pricing, taking into account the Basel Accords that have to do with waste. So we have 6 different priority sectors, and I think that we're on topic 3, which is containers and packaging. So I think that the hub is going to help us implement public policies, and we have other public policies at other levels. This is a law, a state law, so we have a public policy that is a roadmap on the circular economy that has to do with education, with working with local producers, impact at the community. And then we have the hub, the whole idea of plastics, and that's focused on reducing plastic pollution.
And this future treaty on plastic waste, particularly in the oceans, these are processes we have to keep an eye on, because the hub could support the countries of the region in implementing multilateral agreements, international agreements to which they are parties. What's the objective? What's the scope? Okay, let's help the countries implement them. If not, they're just left on paper and in theory, and nothing happens. It's important to ensure teamwork. It's not easy to do coordination at the national level. There are so many different actors involved. How do you facilitate these forums, ensure that all voices are heard? So let's imagine 4 countries, each one with a different system, each one with a different status in terms of progress. It's not easy, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't move forward with cooperation. It is a tool that will allow countries to advance together. We have to create synergies. It's very overwhelming. So if you just, as Pablo Moreno, we can talk about a community of experts. That's what makes working together and cooperation a richer experience. Thank you. Sergio? I have a few comments here. Daniel, the work with you is excellent, and we would like to go deeper into innovation, methane capture and sequestering in the region. I'm sure there's more technology that we could be using to close those gaps. So we would love to keep working with you. With Francisca, we're working with the OECD, particularly on circular economy, not as much on solid waste, but that is the next chapter. As far as the Pacific Alliance is concerned, the presidents of the countries in the past have asked the bank to help them devise a roadmap to deal with plastics. We're working on that right now. We're hoping to continue to do so. One of the regulatory frameworks where we've seen a lot of progress recently is in Chile. We've been working with Chile on that. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who has a question? We have many that have come to us virtually. Well, let's start with Daniel. The question is, what is the role of the private sector in reducing methane emissions, and what's the role of governments? Do you have examples of countries or companies? If they want to join you, how can they access the information and data that you have?
Gracias. Entonces, la pregunta es sobre el sector
So the
privado.
question is about the private sector and governments? Yes. Okay.
It's a good question. I think we have right now 150 governments who are participating in the Global Methane Pledge. In terms of the private sector right now, there are, I think at the level of individual activities, there are individual companies doing things We see real opportunities though, and would welcome a lot of suggestions in the waste sector, for example, what that might look like. Is it organizations that are able to think about disposition of wasted food, for example, and organics? Is it organizations that are in the business of collection and disposal of waste, et cetera? I do think that connecting the dots between all of that, financing has come up quite a bit, everything from the policy environment that allows for tariffs all the way to the upfront investment. One of the big challenges for us will be, how do you connect the dots between the governments and the private sector, and not just national governments, but locals, to mobilize the amount of financing at scale to take care of the methane piece of this much larger waste conversation. So that's a squishy answer. I do think though that I see a lot of opportunity to think about using the foundation that is laid with the waste hub as a way to think of it as a intersection point for a lot of the engagements that we have. So maybe this is a bit off topic from your question, but I'll just share that I think that one opportunity that we would like to explore further is, as you look through the hub, where are the methane elements now and where might they be in the future, that we could, very much in the spirit of what you're describing with the plastics treaty and the other conversations, how can the hub be a resource for and a foundation for the region to think about and track progress towards its goals on reducing methane with the data that's there, with data that could be added, et cetera. So those are some thoughts, but I apologize because I feel like the question about governments. I will say that one more thing is that in the waste sector in particular, success at the coming COP and the COPs that follow, one of the things that ways we will see success is the number of governments like Chile that come forward with marquee signature national policies that do advance the conversation and advance results. And then maybe I would think one thing that inspired me from the presentation from Magda this morning is the tracking that is going on in the hub with regulations. So one very open question is, can that functionality be applied specifically to regulations and policies that sit at the intersection of waste and methane, so that we could see across the region national and subnational governments that are really stepping into a leadership role with respect to their public policy and waste and methane? Because that's what I think success will look like. The more that we have countries, Canada, the US, and Mexico are trying very hard to work on this. Chile is working very hard on this, several others. And so if countries can coalesce at the COP and say, we are actually moving the ball in public policy, that would be a huge step forward.
Gracias. Ahí creo que sí, la invitación también del hub es eso, que estamos en un sistema que
Yes, and we're in a system that is just beginning. It's not a report, it's an interactive system, but we will have modules, matters of interest in the bank. We are working with the Global Methane Pledge. It's not very clear for many different actors at this point and why. So we want to be a resource for that. Carolina, a very specific question for you. The incineration emissions you referring to, these ovens are part of the emissions in the waste system is very clear. What examples or solutions we have? I'm not sure I understand the question. When we look at emissions, these are CO2 emissions. You can detect methane, but what you can see a plume of methane emissions. It's very clear when you see them. And along those same lines, I want to go back to how key cooperation and collaboration are. It's important to have data. It allows cooperation and allows us to have indicators. Working in coordination with you, we are working on a waste methane assessment platform. This will be a platform to raise the profile and measure methane emissions globally. That has a direct relationship with the platform being launched today, the hub. There's much more information on solid waste, but it does mention methane. And we don't necessarily have to wait for the inventories that we see every 1 or 2 years. We can look at what's happening and where we're seeing methane emissions so that we can manage and respond better. The data have to allow us to have indicators, to have better targets so that we can meet our commitments. The sector has a great opportunity. Latin America, with initiatives like this, have a great opportunity to turn themselves into a model for what we want to see globally for reducing methane in the waste sector. We've heard that it's 4% recycling. If we can show change and advancement and also reduce methane, that would be great. Latin America could become a leader, and we could start to tackle these huge problems that we're seeing right now. Yes, with big meters and where you find the points is part of policies. They're very geared towards solutions. Francisca, I'm asked, can other countries join the Pacific Alliance? And if so, how could other governments get involved in the management of plastic waste that you were mentioning? And a few years ago, there are observer countries to the Pacific Alliance, and there are others that have wished to join. It was not a very fruitful process at the time in the region and hemisphere-wide. I do believe Ecuador has completed the process to join the Pacific Alliance. The first step was to extend an invitation to take part and to benefit from the projects we have underway. There are many different ways to become involved. There are no impediments to bilateral relations if countries so wish. But of course, there are limited resources and scopes for projects. I see this as moving from opportunity to opportunity. This can always be done bilaterally. You can look at the lessons learned from Chile and Chile's work with the rest of the region. And let's not forget the Escazú Agreement. That has an observatory, a platform, and even those that have not ratified the agreement can participate as observers. We look at how we work on that particular facet, the facet having to do with information. We wanted to see how we could get involved so that they knew about the hub and different networks, so that you can avail yourselves of the data that is available and that has been mapped out. Okay, that's an open invitation then to collaborate. Chile, with its experience in legislation and if you want a bilateral relation, that option is open. For Pablo, I have two questions that go hand in hand. One is, how are you envisioning the interoperational nature of the systems for countries, and how can you filter the quality and names and approaches that countries have when looking at the collection of solid waste? Those are very good questions. In the first case, what I would say, it depends on how the database has been built. And the focal points and the context that we have in the national agencies, sometimes they're in the environmental ministry, sometimes they're in the health ministry. And that's what will help. They are the ones who will help us to continue to progress in collecting data and information. If we look at the quality of the data, it's based on what we've built with that in mind, establishing the procedures and the guidelines that will enable us to, little by little, examine each case. As far as the nomenclature is concerned, that was a major step in the design process. We look at the diagnostic analysis of the data. We want to look at what existed, what was the baseline. We don't want everyone to have to align to that. We have the technical data sheets for the indicators. We want to make sure that those are consistent with the data being published by the statistics agencies from the governments of each country. The metadata, how the databases have been built, and alignment of nomenclature. It's a minimalist perspective. There's certain limited number of indicators. This makes it easier to collect, validate, and then publish the information. Thank you. As you noted, be in contact with the countries and the advisory committee. It's very important so that there's interoperability. I have a last question for Pablo Moreno. This came to us virtually. If an operator wants to start to collect this data and not start reinvent the wheel, what initial steps would you recommend? First steps for an operator to begin to start collecting the data. It's an interesting question because it requires a change in mindset and culture. It relies on the goodwill of the different actors to be able to make progress in this framework. It would be important to implement technology that provides advantages, that makes the process more efficient. Sometimes we see systems that are developed that are so overly complex that people end up dumping them and go back to paper. The technologies have to be friendly, they have to be user-friendly so that whoever is inputting the data can do so easily. There should be clarity about the process. What is our process? How are we managing the process and every link in the chain, from the point of collection, the micro roads, all of the graphics, everything having to do with the chain. If there's clarity in the process, then the system would be able to align to that process such that it would allow the process to be used to the fullest. And people are already used to recording the information on paper, then just move it to an app, something that's very easy, that's very easy to use. And WhatsApp is one of the ways you could do it. We've been very creative. We have personnel who are the operators or drivers of collection trucks. They may not, they will usually have a device at that time. So if you have an app or WhatsApp, they could use that. This would help them to, and also you need to have measures in place to protect from incorrect information being uploaded. You can have digital technologies and applications that would allow us to see these programs online. Thank you very much, Pablo. With the last question, I would like to thank all of the panelists who were part of this panel, those who are here in the audience, and those joining us virtually. I think the great message is the relevance of both the data and our allies, our partners. We invite all of the different governments, private actors, and philanthropic organizations to look at the hub to ensure that all of the data is more centralized and available for everyone. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mucho aprendizaje en los dos paneles. Agradecemos a la audiencia, tanto virtual como presencial.
We
por
have
todos-
learned a lot this morning, and I wanted to thank the audience, both here in the room and our remote audience, for their participation. So now it's an honor for me to invite someone very special to provide us with some closing remarks. He is Mr. Yepes, and he is in charge of infrastructure here at the Inter-American Development Bank, and he is going to talk to us about this project. Thank you. I want to thank all the participants who were with us today, either here in the room or virtually. And for me, it's a privilege to be taking part in this event, because we have been making an effort for some time now to prepare databases that will allow us, not only within the bank, but generally to have greater information about what we're doing, the sectors where we're working, but also we want to provide greater information, better tools to decision makers for them to be more successful in their decision making. And in order to manage the public administration, especially in this area, there too, it's important to have good information. So beginning to work on this agenda not only allows us to complement other efforts that we have been making here within the Inter-American Development Bank, and especially in the Department for Infrastructure and Energy. We are gathering sources of information that give us a better idea of the sectors that we're working in. And also here I could list the work that has been done with the Energy Hub, also the Observatory for Water and Sanitation Latin America. And now to this, we can add this new hub for waste and the circular economy as part of efforts made by the group of governments taking part through their statistics agencies and different sector entities. And they will be leading this effort to gather more information on the circular economy. I wanted to thank Brazil and the INEGI in Mexico, the Administrative Department of DANE in Colombia, Eurostat, the European Union, and the municipality of Rumiñahui. Did I say that right? Rumiñahui, that have shared their experiences with us and helped us gather this information. One of the most critical strategies at the bank is being able to develop that information, as I already said, in order to be able to improve decision-making. Also, I wanted to talk about the efforts of other partner organizations that have supported us in this process, either financially or technically. And here I wanted to mention the work done by the United Nations for the Environment, UNEP, as well as the Global Methane Pledge and the Global Methane Hub and the Pacific Alliance. We have worked with them in collaboration on areas like the emission of greenhouse gases and the sustainable management of plastic. The effort that we're beginning now is an invitation that we issue to work with other countries in the region to make this database even better. The more information we have, the better access we have to best practices, best ideas on how these resources are being managed in other economies and other cities, and how we can share those best practices so as to manage solid waste and facilitate the circular economy in Latin America and the Caribbean. I would call on all of my colleagues here in the bank and also all of the colleagues that are with us as part of this webinar. Please do use this new tool so as you can make analysis, you can manage policies, and in this way you can support good decision-making across the region. Also, the people who were part of our Zoom audience, I would ask you to use this Waste and Circular Economy Hub. And I have some general remarks that I think summarize some of the comments that were made today, things that I thought were especially important. The first thing that I noted is that in 2021 in Latin America and the Caribbean, about 230 million tons of municipal solid waste were dealt with. 231 million tons of waste, 51% of that was put back into the environment, and that is truly sad. Only 4% of that municipal waste was used, and 45% went into landfills. So if we look at the numbers in practical terms, in keeping with this information, only 4% of the waste was reused in some way, but that is truly wasteful in terms of being able to use these resources to make better use of the resources that are contained in solid waste. And second, today we are celebrating the International Recycling Day, and this data makes us very mindful of the growing need to provide universal access to these services and also to accelerate the circularity in the sector. That's very important because it will have an effect on the other infrastructure sectors that we work in. And here we have to avoid disposing of waste in our ecosystems, in our rivers, in our lakes, and that will have a positive effect on the environment. So anything that we can do to make sure that solid waste is used well will have an effect on the economies of the region. And in order to get this transformation and to comply with the Sustainable Development Goals, we need data and statistics that will allow us to measure the impact of our action and also to help us define policies that will work towards better management of these resources so we can implement best practices, learn about best practices so we can apply them in the region through rules, regulations, or the public implementation. And that is why it's so important. And I think that this is a very important first step to move forward with this agenda to better manage solid waste throughout the region. The bank, as the main financial partner of the region, is always ready and willing to support all countries to use the solid waste and manage that waste. And also as a partner, we can support better decisions in terms of policymakers in Latin America and the Caribbean. I am proud to be part of this initiative. This is seminal work and something that we hope will turn into a very effective reality for the work that we do in all of Latin America and the Caribbean. And you can always count on the support of the Inter-American Development Bank to support good management and to enrich this database that is going to be helpful throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, helping us adopt best practices and to learn how to make the best use of solid waste, seeing them as a resource. So I wanted to thank everyone for being with us today for this event. Thank you. Here we're going to be sharing our tool with you. You can take a picture of the QR code so you can begin to use the tool. And we wanted to conclude this enriching event. We have all learned a lot and we saw a lot of commitment here. And we would share with you this message: join the hub, and together let's develop a waste management system and promote the circular economy. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Perdón, tengo otro anuncio.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's another announcement. We do have lunch outside, so please join us so that we can all celebrate launching of this tool.